The more people vote through the U.S. Postal Service, the more individuals are going to be disenfranchised and their votes are not going to count.
Our third expert witness is Hans van Spakovsky, a senior fellow at the conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation, and a long-time sceptic of postal voting. His main concern is that more steps in the procedure of people casting their ballot provide more opportunity for things to go wrong.
The chances that your vote is going to get misdelivered or not delivered in time to be counted, or that it will be rejected by election officials because you haven't provided all of the information necessary, is much higher than if you vote in person where you know you're putting your ballot into the ballot box. My other major concern is the fact that postal ballots are the only kind of ballot that are voted outside the supervision of election officials and outside the observation of poll watchers, which in many ways destroys the transparency that is essential to our election process.
This plays into one of the other claims that President Trump has made. Ballots not filled in at the polling station are more at risk of fraud. As we said in part one, the figures suggest that it is a very small problem affecting a tiny number of votes. But it can happen. In the 2018 congressional election in North Carolina, postal ballots that had been mailed to people's homes were alleged to have been unlawfully collected and tampered with by a consultant working for the Republican candidate. Initial vote counting was in favour of the Republican candidate winning, but the election results were overturned by the state. A rerun also returned a win for the Republicans.
And what they were doing was going to voters' homes to collect their absentee ballots. The evidence showed that in many cases, they actually filled out the ballot for the voter instead of the voter filling it out. In other cases, they basically stole the ballots, forged signatures. They changed ballots. Some ballots they would pick up had already been voted, and they would change the vote to make sure it went for the candidate they were working for.
Ballot collecting, or the picking up of ballot papers on behalf of voters, is illegal in North Carolina, but allowable in limited circumstances in many states. But there is another problem. Voting too far ahead of an election doesn't allow for a last-minute change of heart. Then there is the problem that voters don't always fill them in properly. Wouldn't a huge education campaign help minimise the problems with postal votes?
There's always a percentage of individuals who don't get it right, and they're not going to get it right no matter how much more education you do about it. And unfortunately, the number that don't get it right is higher than the number who don't get it right voting in a polling place.
Many people in the midst of a pandemic, though, are going to be very unhappy, surely, standing in line and voting at a polling station.
Well, I understand that, but what they need to understand, I think people need to be educated about this, is that we can safely vote in the midst of this. If I can go shopping for my groceries, there's no reason I can't go to my polling place and vote. And in fact, I did that locally a month and a half ago. I live in a small town in Virginia. We had town council elections. The polling place was open, and I actually felt safer in my polling place than I do at my grocery store because they took extensive precautions to make sure there would be no infection spread in the polling place.
As we heard in part two, though, much of the concern is centred not on mistakes made by voters or even fraud, but that ballots will not be reliably delivered.